The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as spectators, reporters, and legal professionals shuffled papers and whispered behind their hands. Everyone was waiting for a key witness to arrive, though no one expected her to walk in wearing glittery pink shoes, clinging to a worn-out stuffed bunny, and holding a crumpled piece of paper covered in crayon. 3-year-old Emily Carter entered the courtroom without a word, her small hand held by her foster mother, Sandra Lane. The sight of the child sent a ripple of disbelief through the room. A toddler? In a courtroom? For such a serious trial? Even the most seasoned attorneys exchanged skeptical glances. The judge, Honorable Marla Donovan, peered over her glasses as Emily was led to the witness seating area, though she was far too small to sit in the chair properly. A booster seat had been placed there for her, and a small coloring book sat on the desk in front of her. Emily didn't speak. She simply clutched her paper tightly, stared at no one, and looked as if she might cry. The prosecutor, Ms. Rowan, approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said, "we are aware of the sensitivity here. Emily is not here to testify in a traditional sense. She has been approved for presence as a visual and emotional reference. Her communication has been limited but relevant." The defense attorney raised an eyebrow, clearly doubting that any relevant insight could come from a 3-year-old who hadn't spoken since she was removed from her biological home. He leaned into his microphone and said, "Your Honor, this seems more theatrical than evidentiary." "I object to Mr. Fields," the judge cut in. "I will allow this. I've reviewed the psychologist's recommendation. If anything becomes inappropriate or disruptive, we'll stop immediately." Emily remained silent, her tiny legs dangling from the chair. The room fell quiet again, all attention now on the small figure barely able to reach the table in front of her. She didn't seem scared, just focused. Her eyes darted around the courtroom. To some, it looked like confusion. But Sandra, her foster mother, knew better. Emily was remembering. This case was about Emily, or rather, about what had happened to her. Months ago, Child Services had found her living in horrifying conditions. The details of her rescue had been kept private, but insiders knew the allegations were grave. Abuse, neglect, and perhaps something worse. The defendant, a decorated police officer named Mark Daniels, stood accused of using his badge to bypass mandatory reporting systems. His visit to Emily's home months before her removal was suspiciously undocumented, but no one had expected Emily herself to appear in court. Judge Donovan called for a short recess to prepare the next segment of the hearing. During that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, a K-9 officer entered with a large German Shepherd by his side. The dog, Bruno, wore a vest labeled Comfort K9 and had been trained to sit beside victims or children during court appearances. He was calm, obedient, and quiet, but what happened next stunned everyone. The moment Emily saw the dog, she froze, her eyes locked on him. She slowly stood up in her booster seat, dropped the crayon she had been holding, and pointed directly at the dog. A beat of silence passed. Then, in a voice stronger than anyone had heard from her in weeks, Emily said 2 words, "Bad man." The entire courtroom went dead silent. The judge looked up from her notes. The prosecutor's face drained of color. The defense attorney turned his head sharply. Everyone tried to understand what she meant. She wasn't pointing at Officer Daniels. She was pointing at the dog, or so they thought, but Emily wasn't. Pointing at Bruno in fear. She was remembering something only she had witnessed. And in that small but powerful moment, her innocent words shattered the courtroom's certainty. Something much deeper was about to unfold. For a few seconds after Emily spoke, the courtroom remained locked in stunned silence. Everyone's eyes moved between the child and the dog. Bruno, the calm, well-trained police canine, didn't react. He simply stood beside his handler with the composed presence he was known for. But Emily's words, "bad man," echoed like a drumbeat in the quiet space. The judge leaned forward slightly, confused. "Counselor Rowan, would you explain?" she asked, her voice measured. Prosecutor Rowan rose slowly, eyes still on Emily. "Your Honor, the child has rarely spoken since being removed from the home. We've never heard her use that phrase before, but she's been drawing always the same scene. Always a man, a house, and a dog. We believe Bruno may be triggering a memory." "Of the abuse?" the judge asked softly. Rowan nodded. "Possibly. Or of who was present when it happened." Across the room, defense attorney Fields smirked. "Your Honor, a child pointing at a dog and saying, 'bad man,' doesn't prove anything. She's 3 years old. Imagination is not evidence." "Noted," the judge replied, "but she's not identifying the dog. She's responding to a memory associated with it." Then she looked at Emily again, who was now sitting, silent and motionless, staring at Bruno. The judge added gently, "Let's proceed with care." Sandra, the foster mother, leaned toward Emily and asked softly, "Sweetheart, do you want to show the judge your drawing?" Emily didn't answer with words. She simply handed over the crumpled paper she'd been clinging to all morning. The judge allowed it to be passed forward. A court aide handed it up to her, and she unfolded it carefully. In crayon lines, the drawing showed a little girl, a house with a broken window, a tall man in a dark blue uniform, and a large dog standing beside him. The figure of the man was shaded and roughly, almost scribbled out, with red crayon marks across the face. "What does this mean, Emily?" Sandra asked gently. Emily whispered something almost too quiet to hear. A nearby microphone caught it. He was there. Now the entire courtroom began to lean in. Their curiosity piqued. Prosecutor Rowan approached the stand slowly. "Emily, do you remember the man?" she asked softly, kneeling. Emily looked at her, then down at the paper. She touched the red scribbled face and said again, "Bad man." Prosecutor Rowan stood and turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission to bring in a photographic lineup. We believe the child's memory of Officer Daniels is linked to that day." The judge hesitated. "Are we sure we're not leading her?" "We'll use neutral photos," Rowan said. "If she doesn't react, we'll stop." The judge gave a nod. The defense objected again. "This is courtroom theater. She could be reacting to any man in uniform." But the judge, despite her concern, allowed the process. "Proceed, but with caution." Over the next few minutes, 5 large photographs were brought into the room. 5 men, all in police uniforms, including one of Officer Daniels and one of Bruno with Daniels during a community event. The photos were placed on easels in a row. Emily was quiet again. At first, she didn't react. She looked at one and the next, emotionless. But when her eyes fell on the 5th photo, the one with Bruno and Officer Daniels side by side, her face changed instantly. Her lips trembled. She pointed at the image and said it again, louder this time. "Bad man?" Gasps rang out across the courtroom. Even the judge couldn't hide her reaction. "Court will recess for 20 minutes, she announced, rising to her feet. Outside the courtroom, phones buzzed. Reporters whispered frantically. What had just happened wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. Emily hadn't been expected to speak. She wasn't supposed to remember. But somehow, the presence of the dog had unlocked something that months of therapy, reports, and social work couldn't touch. And now, the trial was no longer focused on technicalities. It was focused on the voice, however small, of a little girl who remembered more than anyone imagined. The courtroom reassembled 20 minutes later, though the energy in the room had completely shifted. What had started as a routine day in a complex trial was now something extraordinary. Everyone who had been skeptical earlier, the defense, the reporters, even the judge, now sat quietly, watching Emily with careful attention. Emily sat back in her booster seat, nervously tapping her fingers on her drawing. Bruno, the comfort dog, remained in the corner with his handler. Though calm as always, his presence now carried unexpected weight. He was no longer just a support animal. He had become a symbol, a living key that had unlocked something hidden inside the child. Prosecutor Rowan approached the bench again. Your Honor, the drawing, combined with the child's consistent reaction to the photo lineup, suggests a memory trigger. We request that the drawing be officially entered into evidence. Defense Attorney Fields stood. Objection. This is a child's artwork, not a sworn statement. The judge, now far more cautious in her skepticism, responded. The court will allow it, not as direct evidence, but as context for the child's emotional response. Proceed carefully. The drawing was projected onto a monitor. The courtroom could now clearly see the stick figure house, the red scribbled face of the man in uniform, and the recognizable image of a large dog beside him. The more they stared at it, the less it looked like a childish doodle and more like a frozen memory. Emily, Rowan said gently, kneeling again, can you tell us what this is? Emily hesitated. Her eyes welled up with tears. She looked at Sandra, who gave her a soft smile and a small nod of encouragement. That's my house, she whispered. That's him. Him who? Rowan asked. Emily pointed at the man with the scribbled-out face, the man who came with the dog. Bruno let out a small breath, almost like a sigh, and lay down beside his handler. It was a normal canine behavior, yet in that courtroom, even his sigh seemed to deepen the silence. Judge Donovan asked a new question, her voice calm but firm. Do we have a record of Officer Daniels visiting that home? Rowan opened it. Folder. Yes, Your Honor. Officer Daniels was dispatched to the child's residence 3 months prior to her removal. The incident was logged as a welfare check, but there is no body cam footage and no follow-up report filed. The judge frowned. That's unusual. Yes, Rowan replied, especially since the child was found malnourished and covered in bruises only weeks later. Defense Attorney Fields stood again. Your Honor, none of this proves wrongdoing. The officer may have seen nothing to report at the time. And yet the child remembers him. The judge said quietly. At that moment, Sandra gently slid another folded paper from her purse. She made another drawing, she said. It's different. Rowan accepted the paper and unfolded it at the bench. Then her eyes widened. This drawing showed the same house, but this time the man was inside it. The door was open. The girl, clearly Emily, stood on the porch, reaching out. The man's face was again red and scribbled, but the dog's eyes were drawn wide, like they were watching. She draws this again and again, Sandra explained. Always the same scene. Sometimes she cries while she's coloring. That image, when displayed to the courtroom, silenced even the harshest skeptics. Whatever memory Emily had buried, it had found a voice through her drawings. And now everyone could feel it. A child had been trying to speak all along, and the legal system had almost missed it. The judge leaned back in her seat and whispered under her breath, this little girl might be the only witness who matters. Outside, reporters were already typing furiously. Inside, the pieces of something dark were starting to form a complete picture. And Emily, still just 3 years old, had only just begun to reveal what she knew. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from curiosity to deep unease. The drawings, Emily's words, and her recognition of Bruno in the photo with Officer Daniels were too consistent to dismiss. Prosecutor Rowan knew that what had once been a circumstantial case was quickly gaining an emotional core, one delivered through the smallest, most unlikely witness. That afternoon, the court reconvened with a focused sense of purpose. Judge Donovan called for Officer Mark Daniels to take the stand. A man in his late 30s with a clean-cut appearance and confident posture rose from the defense table and approached the witness stand. He looked like someone who belonged in a uniform, a seasoned officer, polished and composed. He adjusted his tie and sat down calmly. "Officer Daniels," Rowan began, "you conducted a welfare check on Emily Carter's household 3 months before her removal. Is that correct?" "Yes," Daniels answered without hesitation. "I received the dispatch, responded with my K-9 unit Bruno, checked the home, and found no signs of immediate danger." "No report was filed," Rowan noted. "There was nothing to report," Daniels said coolly. Rowan raised an eyebrow. "No bruises? No signs of neglect?" The mother explained the girl had fallen off a swing. There were toys scattered outside. The girl was shy, but not injured in a way that required escalation. In my judgment, the home was safe. Rowan clicked. A remote, and Emily's drawing appeared again on the screen. "And how do you explain this?" "The girl drew you, your dog, and a memory of that day that clearly made a lasting impression." Daniel stiffened. "She's 3. Kids draw monsters and imaginary things all the time. But she recognized you in a photo. And she called you," Rowan paused for emphasis, "a bad man." Daniels shrugged. "I can't control a toddler's imagination." In the gallery, people shifted uncomfortably. The calmness in Daniel's tone now felt unsettling. Judge Donovan leaned forward. "Officer Daniels, do you remember what time you left that residence?" "About 20 minutes after I arrived," he replied. Rowan turned to the screen again. "Our timestamp from the body cam system shows your unit was logged at the location for 1 hour and 12 minutes. Daniel's jaw clenched. "I was delayed." "Traffic," he muttered. "But the car was parked the entire time, according to dashcam." "GPS logs," Rowan added, holding up a folder. Daniels looked toward his attorney. Fields quickly objected. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is speculative. There's no evidence of wrongdoing. There's a missing report, no body cam footage, conflicting timelines, and now a traumatized child who identifies the officer as part of her abuse memory," the judge replied. "This line of questioning will continue." Daniels folded his arms, but his gaze wavered. For the first time during the trial, the mask of calm confidence cracked. He adjusted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable. Rowan took a breath and said, "Your Honor, we are requesting an emergency review of Officer Daniels' complete service history, with a focus on closed welfare calls involving children. His body cam failures appear more than coincidental." The judge nodded. "Granted. I want the review completed within 72 hours." In the back of the courtroom, Sandra gently reached for Emily's hand. The little girl, unaware of the legal drama unfolding around her, continued to color quietly. But her presence had done what 2 months of investigation could not. Her memory, hazy, unspoken, but persistent, had begun to shine a light in places the system had long ignored. What had been seen as a child's accidental statement was now evolving into a direct connection. And behind the badge, a different story was beginning to emerge. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed. The gallery included child advocates, off-duty officers, and members of the press who hadn't stopped covering the case since Emily first said, "Bad man." The atmosphere was charged with tension. People knew this was no longer about one welfare visit gone wrong. It had the markings of a systemic failure, one that now hung on the testimony of a toddler. The requested internal review had been expedited, and what it uncovered shook the prosecution team. Prosecutor Rowan stood with a stack of documents. "Your Honor, Daniels was the responding officer on 5 previous welfare calls involving children within the last 2 years. In 3 of those cases, no reports were filed, and in 2, body cam footage was mysteriously unavailable. All 5 children were later removed by child services for abuse or neglect. Judge Donovan's expression hardened. Was any action ever taken against Officer Daniels for these omissions? No, Your Honor. The missing reports were labeled as administrative oversights. The defense scrambled to object, but the damage was done. The court now saw a pattern, and it didn't favor Officer Daniels. Emily was brought back into the room. This time, she wasn't just a silent observer. A child psychologist named Dr. Lynn Powell walked beside her, holding a soft-spoken conversation as they approached the witness corner, which had been modified into a child-safe space. Judge Donovan addressed the psychologist. Dr. Powell, the court understands Emily's age limits her ability to testify, but do you believe she understands what she saw? Yes, Your Honor, Dr. Powell said. Children don't recall events in adult language, but they do store trauma in memory. Emily has drawn the same event consistently, always featuring the officer, the dog, and a frightened version of herself. Her emotional reactions are not theatrical. They're rooted in memory. The judge nodded. Proceed. Dr. Powell sat beside Emily. She gently unfolded a drawing pad and handed Emily some crayons. Emily, can you draw the day you saw Bruno? And the man? Emily didn't speak. She began drawing slowly, pressing the crayon harder with each stroke. As the courtroom watched in silence, a clear image formed. A child hiding behind a couch, a man standing near a broken lamp, and Bruno sitting in the background. This time, there was something new. Tears on the girl's face. When she finished, Dr. Powell asked softly, "Can you tell us what's happening here?" Emily nodded and whispered. He yelled. I was scared. Bruno looked at me. And what did the man do? Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she managed one word. Hit. The courtroom froze. Gasps came from the gallery. Even the defense. Attorney's pen slipped from his hand. Judge Donovan leaned forward. Emily, who hit you? The little girl hesitated. Then she slowly lifted her finger and pointed toward Officer Daniels. Silence. No one moved. Daniels shifted in his chair, face flushing. His attorney leaned over and whispered something urgently. But Daniels didn't react. Emily looked down at her lap, clinging to her drawing. She didn't speak again. She didn't have to. Rion turned to the judge. Your Honor, we now have verbal identification of the defendant by the child victim, combined with the established pattern of negligence and the emotional consistency of her reactions. We believe the court has all it needs. Judge Donovan didn't respond immediately. She stared at Daniels for a long moment before saying, The court will take a short recess. The jury will remain seated. Outside, word of Emily's statement spread like wildfire. Journalists typed furiously. Social media lit up. The case had transformed from complex to undeniable. A 3-year-old had spoken truth in the only way. She could dot, and the courtroom and country were finally listening. The court resumed after the brief recess, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. There was a sense that something historic was unfolding. Not just a trial, but an exposure of something hidden for far too long. Emily's voice had pierced the silence, and now prosecutors were determined to dig deeper. Prosecutor Rowan stepped back up to the front of the court. She looked more focused than ever. Your Honor, during the recess, we were handed new evidence by a former member of the police department. With the court's permission, I'd like to enter it into the record. Whose? The source? Judge Donovan asked. Rowan nodded toward the door. A tall man in plain clothes stepped into the courtroom. Detective Alan Whitmore, retired. Served 22 years, 9 of which were alongside Officer Daniels. Whitmore took the stand with a heavy sigh. He looked around the courtroom, then directly at Emily, who was quietly drawing again. "I'm here because I couldn't stay silent anymore," he said. "I've known Mark Daniels a long time. He wasn't always like this, but over the last few years, something changed." Rowan approached the stand. "Can you explain?" Whitmore nodded. Daniels was known for being thorough, on paper. But off the record, he'd complain about too much paperwork and nuisance calls. He used his badge to decide what mattered and what didn't. "And the missing reports?" "I found them," Whitmore said quietly. "Filed away. In an unofficial cabinet, not logged in the system. 5 incomplete case files involving children. All marked as resolved without investigation." Rowan held up a folder. "We've matched the handwriting. They're Daniels." Gasps echoed across the room. The defense tried to object again, but the judge was already flipping through the pages. "These are dated the same day Daniels visited Emily's home," she said, her voice tight. "And this one, the notes say mother cooperative, child shy. No bruises visible." "But they were visible," Rowan said, stepping forward. "Emily's pediatrician later documented them." Judge Donovan set the file down slowly. "Mr. Whitmore, why didn't you come forward earlier?" "I tried, Your Honor," he said. "Twice. Both times I was warned that pushing would affect my pension. The department protects its own. Until now." Emily looked up briefly, meeting Whitmore's eyes. She didn't smile, but something softened in her face, a recognition that someone else had stepped up for her. Daniels leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. The lawyer shook his head. There was no defense strong enough for what was unfolding. Then Rioan dropped one more piece of evidence. "We recovered security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera. It's grainy, but shows Daniels entering Emily's house without requesting backup or waiting for child services. He was inside for over an hour." Judge Donovan stared at the screen as a clip played in silence. Daniels at the door, knocking, waiting, entering, then nothing for 72 minutes. When he emerged, he was adjusting his uniform, looking around, and walking straight to his car. "This," Rowan said quietly, "is not protocol." The jury watched, shocked. The public gallery sat stone still. Sandra held Emily's hand, her knuckles white from the grip. Judge Donovan turned toward Daniels. "At this point, officer, I advise you to reconsider your plea." Daniels said nothing, but the court didn't need his words anymore. Emily had spoken. Whitmore had confirmed. The files, the video, the patterns, it all painted one clear picture. For too long, a man behind a badge had used his authority to silence the voices of the vulnerable. But today, the smallest voice had broken. That silence wide open. The courtroom was packed again the next morning. The jury had been sequestered overnight. And now, after weeks of testimony and a whirlwind of revelations, they were ready to deliver their verdict. The gallery was silent as Judge Donovan entered, followed by the bailiff who brought in the jurors. Even the hum of whispers had disappeared. No one wanted to miss a second. Emily sat quietly with Sandra in the front row, her crayons and drawings tucked neatly in her small backpack. She was calm, unusually so, as if, somehow, she knew that the truth she had carried was finally being heard. "All rise," the bailiff said. The judge gave a small nod, and everyone took their seats. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a trembling voice, stood. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Donovan asked. "We have, Your Honor. Please read it." The foreman cleared her throat and held up the paper. "In the case of the state versus Officer Mark Daniels, on the charge of aggravated child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of falsifying official records, guilty." A sharp inhale swept across the room. Several people teared up. Daniels sat motionless, his jaw tight, eyes locked on the table in front of him. His attorney looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Prosecutor Rowan didn't smile. She simply nodded, closed her file, and looked toward Emily. Sandra whispered to the little girl, "You did it, sweetheart." Emily looked up, blinking. "No more bad man?" "No more," Sandra whispered back. "He can't hurt anyone now." "Judge." Donovan turned to Daniels. "This court finds you guilty on all charges. Sentencing will occur next week. Until then, you are remanded without bail." She banged the gavel sharply. "Court is adjourned." Daniels was immediately escorted by 2 deputies. As he passed by Bruno, the very dog who had unknowingly triggered Emily's testimony, he didn't even glance at him. Bruno didn't react either. He lay calmly beside his handler, just as he had throughout the trial, unaware that his presence had been instrumental in exposing a lie hidden in plain sight. As the courtroom emptied, journalists flooded the hallway. Outside, cameras flashed. Headlines were already hitting the web. Toddler's 2 words bring down police officer. Courtroom shocked as child identifies abuser through police dog. Justice found through crayon and courage. Back inside, the judge approached Emily and Sandra personally. "Miss Carter," she said kindly, "I've seen hundreds of cases in this room. Some victories, some heartbreaks. But what you did, what you remembered, that was extraordinary." Emily, overwhelmed, clutched Sandra's arm. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her drawings, her whispers, her brave little finger pointing toward truth. That had been enough. Dr. Powell, the child psychologist, approached with a smile. "We're going to continue working with Emily," she said. "Now that she's begun speaking again, there's hope she'll recover faster than anyone predicted." Judge Donovan nodded. "And she'll have all the support this system can give." Later that day, Prosecutor Rowan held a brief press conference. She didn't take a victory lap. Instead, she looked directly into the cameras and said, "This wasn't just about one officer. It was about listening, truly listening, to the smallest voices among us. We nearly failed Emily, but she gave us a second chance to hear her. And the world had listened. Justice had been served, not with loud arguments or dramatic testimony, but through the quiet, persistent bravery of a child who had every reason to stay silent, but chose not to. The trial was over, but its echoes spread far beyond the courtroom walls. News stations across the country featured Emily's story, not as another headline in a cycle of tragedies, but as a rare moment of truth and triumph. People were captivated by the courage of a 3-year-old who spoke just 2 words and helped bring down a man protected by uniform and silence. Emily didn't fully understand what had happened, but something had shifted in her. She laughed more. Now, she spoke in full sentences sometimes. Sandra, her foster mother, noticed she no longer woke up crying at night. Instead, Emily would talk about her crayons, her drawings, and more than anything, Bruno. The department, aware of the emotional bond between child and dog, made a surprising announcement 1 week after the verdict. Bruno was being retired from service and officially adopted by Emily's family. It was the least they could do, they said. But for Emily, it meant the world. The first day Bruno arrived at Sandra's house, Emily waited on the porch with wide eyes. When the officer let go of the leash, Bruno trotted straight to her, tail wagging. He didn't bark or jump. He simply sat down in front of her, as if he knew exactly where he belonged. Emily hugged him tightly, whispering, "No more bad men." Bruno licked her face gently, and the moment felt like the final closing of a door neither of them wanted to open again. But even as Emily's life began to heal, the impact of her bravery rippled outward. Child advocacy organizations launched. New initiatives inspired by her case. The courtroom's use of drawings, child-safe testimony setups, and emotional support animals was praised as a model for future cases involving young victims. Legislation was even proposed to mandate body cam footage in all welfare checks involving minors, and an independent oversight board for complaints against law enforcement was created in the state. Detective Alan Whitmore, who had testified during the trial, was reinstated as a consultant to help investigate other buried files within the department. His conscience had nearly cost him everything, but now he was part of a rebuilding process. Prosecutor Rowan received national recognition, but she never took credit. The real hero, she said in an interview, is a 3-year-old girl who taught all of us that silence doesn't mean absence, that a whisper can sometimes roar louder than any argument. As the months passed, Emily flourished. She began attending therapy with Dr. Powell twice a week, and Sandra officially filed to adopt her. Emily's drawings slowly changed too. The houses now had open windows. The stick figure girl smiled, and Bruno appeared in almost every one, not beside a scary man, but beside Emily, chasing butterflies or lying in the sun. On the day the adoption was finalized, the judge from the trial, Marla Donovan, arrived quietly in the back of the courtroom. She didn't speak publicly. She just watched, smiled, and nodded when the final papers were signed. Bruno wore a little vest that said, "Big Brother" on it. When the judge asked if Emily had anything to say, she stood up on the bench beside Sandra, looked around the room, and said, "Thank you for listening." Simple words, but powerful ones. And just like that, the journey that began with 2 trembling words in a courtroom, "Bad man," ended in a place of safety, hope, and love. Emily had found her voice. She had changed the lives of others, and she would never, ever be alone again.